The topic that I did my co-culture presentation on is the deaf culture. I think this is a great opportunity for me just because I'm starting a sign language class in the fall, and I just needed a little more background knowledge about how they communicate and how they interact with each other. So this actually helped me out more than I thought it would. So this first slide I did is stereotyping, just to get rid of all the stereotypes out there. A lot of people think they're true when really they are false. So I decided to start with this just to get it out of the way, and then you can look at this presentation a lot differently than you would if you thought all these stereotypes are true. So I just put them in a question form, that way you can answer them true or false, and then at the end I'll give you the answer and you can see how well you did. All deaf people can sign. Hearing aids make you hear normally. All deaf people can talk. All deaf people want to hear. All deaf people can hear with a hearing aid. These are all false. All deaf people cannot sign. There are some people who have had a hearing aid since they were born, and they have learned to speak before they have even learned to sign. Hearing aids kind of make you hear with a muffled, quiet sound more than the loud and clear sound how we would normally hear. All deaf people can't talk because they have never had a hearing. They might have been born in the earlier years and haven't had the opportunity to have a hearing aid right away, so then they had to learn sign language right away and then had to learn speaking later on down the line. All deaf people want to hear. All deaf people may not want to hear. There are some that really want to hear, but some people just don't want to change how they have been their whole life. They don't want to start hearing after being deaf for 20, 30 years. And it's a totally different experience from the hearing aid to hearing without a hearing aid. So some people just turn it down and don't want it. All deaf people can hear with a hearing aid. There are some people out there that are completely deaf and they cannot hear with or without a hearing aid. This slide is on chapter 8 out of the textbook, Listening More Than Meets the Ear. Elements in the listening process. Although you may think that hard of hearing people can't listen as well as others, they can actually hear and pick up a lot more than we think they can. For hearing, they hear whether it's through the sign language or through the actual speaking. When they hear through the sign language, it's not the actual sound waves hitting the eardrum, but it is them hearing them in their mind while they are signing to them. Then they have to understand what the person is telling them. So they have to really pay attention to what's going on, whether it's their body movement, their facial expressions, or the signing. Then they have to make sure they are understanding, so then they can respond in an orderly manner and respond the correct way to what they are being told. Types of listening responses. Hard of hearing people can do this really well, and some may even do it better than other people who actually have the privilege to hear. For listening, they have to prompt what they are hearing, so they might hear someone talking and then just say a brief statement or just use silent motions like nodding the head just to prompt them to keep going and that they're listening. Then they'd ask a lot of questions, so whether or not the person is signing, speaking, kind of doing gestures, anything like that, they will always stop them and ask a lot of questions. Sometimes I feel like they ask more questions than I should be. I hardly ask questions, and I feel like I'm just slacking after I saw a couple people signing to each other. They also do a lot of paraphrasing, so someone will talk and then they'll kind of interrupt politely, so they'll just kind of tap them on the shoulder and then say, is this what you're trying to say? I feel like you're mad because of this, kind of like those activities that we have done throughout this course. And then they also judge by, they say, oh, you're doing a great job, keep up the great work, that's a good idea. So they're really supportive of each other, and I think that's really great just because they come together more than I think most people do. So it just makes it great to see that that is actually happening. This slide is on chapter 6 out of the textbook, Language Barrier and Bridge. Language is symbolic, whether it's English, Spanish, French, any language is symbolic. Sign language is also symbolic and not literal. There are 100 different sign languages, and I'll talk about that in a different slide. The impact of language. Everyone who I talk to says that learning sign language really impacts the way they communicate. Some say it never stops, like the impact never stops. So I feel like people who are able to speak normally to their family at home and then go and help students or help others learn sign language or are able to talk to someone who only can sign, it really impacts them on their daily life. So the impact of language, whether or not it's just two people speaking out loud or two people speaking sign language, a person speaking sign language and a person speaking out loud, it just has a big impact no matter what. Then gender and language. I really found out about this in my mom's classroom because she has a couple hard of hearing people, and a lot of the males just kind of blew it off and didn't really care that they had a disability and didn't pay attention to it, whereas the females really tried to get help and tried getting to where they needed to be. But this isn't the case for everyone. A lot of people might be opposite, where the males really want to get help and try getting to where they need to be, whereas the females might not want anything to do with it. Communicating effectively. So to communicate effectively with someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, the first thing you need to do is make sure the person is looking at you. So whether you're talking to someone who is completely deaf or can hear a little bit with a hearing aid, always make sure that the person is looking at you. Because if you're starting to talk to someone who is completely deaf, they're not going to know that you're talking to them. Speak at a reasonable pace. So instead of talking like this, talk a little slower, but don't talk to where they feel like you're judging them or you're making fun of them. So just make sure you find that reasonable pace to where they understand you, but you're not making fun of them. Use an expressive face. Just because you're either signing or talking and you think that they understand it just by that, they can't really hear the tone of voice. So you have to make sure that you have an expressive face. That way they can see what your emotions are and see how you're feeling, and that way they can understand what you're trying to say better instead of misinterpret it. Use natural gestures. So whether or not you're doing the okay sign or a thumbs up or a so-so with your hand, just use those kind of things and talk more with your hands just so they can kind of understand you better, because they're used to watching the hands. But again, make sure you use an expressive face. So this slide is on communicating, on how deaf and hard of hearing people communicate with each other. Like I said before, there are many different sign languages, over 100 different sign languages actually, and that may be between the different countries, different cultures, different families, whatever. There's so many of them. Even though there are so many of them, they use the same shape, orientation, position, and movement of the hands. So they might have the same signing, but it might have different meanings to it, so it might not come across the same as it would to someone in your family or someone in the same country or anything like that. So you kind of have to be careful. I will admit that I thought lip reading was easy for hard of hearing or deaf people, because I always thought that's all like how they could communicate if someone couldn't sign. But lip reading is very difficult and imprecise in any language, including sign language. This really stood out to me when I was reading through my book called Through Deaf Eyes. It only stood out to me just because I feel bad that I assumed that they could lip read, and I've been talking to people who are deaf thinking that they could lip read, and then I would wonder why they look so confused on what I just said. Different difficulties depending on when the person became deaf. So they may have became deaf when they were really young, way back in the day when hearing aids weren't even invented yet, so they had to come up with their own communication. And you never know, they never might have learned how to speak, so they might have a grandchild who is deaf and can only speak and not know how to sign. So then you have that communication barrier where you have to try learning sign language or have to try speaking, that way they can understand you. Facial expressions and body movements are huge factors in communicating, just because it's called total body. They watch your signing, they watch your facial expressions, and they watch your body movements. That's how they get your emotions, your tone, your everything that you were feeling and trying to put towards them. How big your signs are also a big factor. If they're small, if they're sharp, that might mean you're mad. If they're big, elegant, that might mean you're happy. Otherwise, there's also where you're close together, your hands are close together, that might mean you're trying to whisper. Or if they're big and long, that might mean you're trying to yell or speak loudly. So I did a couple interviews, and the first question that I did for the interview was, do you like face-to-face communication and communication through technology better? Almost all of them said that they like face-to-face communication better, but one said that they liked face-to-face and social media or through technology better, just because they like face-to-face because they can actually get the tone, get the emotion through that face and through that body. So they like that a little better, but then they also like technology better because then they can get their point across a little faster. The only downfall is that they won't get the same tone and same emotion. The second question that I asked is, when you communicate, do you watch facial expressions or body movements to get a better understanding on their emotions? They all said 100% watch the body movements, 100% watch the facial expressions. Again, it's that total body where they have to watch everything to get the emotions, the tone. They have to watch all of that and pick up every little thing just so they can understand what is being said. Question number 3. While using social media, do you communicate differently than you would someone standing in front of you? A lot of people said that they use a lot of slang while texting or on social media, and they'll use a lot of emojis to get their emotion across. They won't talk differently on social media or through texting than they would with someone standing in front of you, but they do talk a little differently, where they might say LOL or say laugh my butt off or something like that. So they do communicate a little differently, but they have that tone or have that emotion in person with that person face to face with them. Question 4. Does the way you communicate have an impact on your life? They all said that it has such a big impact on them that they love going home at night. The interpreters said that the way that they are able to help their students out through the school day and help them through everything, through depression maybe from going to middle school to high school and can't speak, they help them through that, and they said that the impact never stops, that impact is 100% there 24/7. So I feel like this language does have a big impact on people just because it's not very popular and it's not a lot of people can sign. So if you have a couple people who can sign and help people throughout their daily life, I feel like that is such a big impact on you, and if I was able to do that, that would have such a big impact on me.